Assistants galore. "Ah, Arion," said Codrich. "Ready for another day's work?" Nothing had gone well for Arion over the last few days. Since the creator's mishap, things had gone from bad to worse. That very day he had been charged with getting them back. The next, he and Codrich had carelessly acquired sufficient material, and then the final day, Codrich had proceeded to undo their previous work by wasting a chunk of their valuable wood on the foray of trying to build a Floincy in a day. All of this had led to a sporadic night's sleep for Arion and this sentence: "Yes, I am, but I'm not sure you should help out today." The king stared blankly at Arion until he added, "Or any day after." "What?" "I'm just not sure that you're the most suitable candidate for the job. I mean, you wouldn't expect a carpenter to be a good king, would you?" "Of course not, they're buffoons." Arion paused. "Yes, well, on a different, but not totally unrelated note, I think it is a mistake to ask you to continue with the work, especially when you have lots of important ruling to do." If Codrich had been left to his own devices, he might well have worked out the impolite things Arion was insinuating. Arbrilla caught his attention though. "Are you still sniggering at that joke?" Loath as she was to assist anyone who had stuck their foot in it, Arbrilla knew that they needed to get off this island. She also had enough wits about her to realise that Codrich was probably not the most reliable person to have employed to ensure the work got done. So, on this historic occasion, she took Arion's side. "I was just thinking that he is probably right. Things have been hectic the last couple of days without you around." Arbrilla's body went rigid. Her teeth locked and her face looked considerably pained. "I can't rule without you." Codrich stared at his wife, and she did her best pleading face. It wasn't a look she had much practice with, and came across more like pity, which was also an expression she was not comfortable using. Codrich threw his hands in the air. "Fine." He slumped over to his chair and slumped into it. From her lair, Arbrilla shot Arion a glance from her vicious eyes to make clear to him she was not happy with what she had just had to do. "You'll still need an assistant," said Codrich after some brooding. "Already got one lined up, sire." Arion knocked on the door and waited. A woman answered. "Hello, Arion." "Hello, Mrs. Das. Is Jutta in?" "Helda, please," said the woman. "He's out with his father, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind you popping in on them. They're out fishing on the Sunset Coast." "Thank you, Mrs. Helda, ma'am." Jutta's mother smiled. "Don't call me ma'am, for goodness sake. It makes me sound like an old lady." "Just Helda is fine. Can I offer you something to eat before you scoot off? I've got some lovely steaks if you're interested." "Vegetarian, but thank you." "Oh yes," said Helda, her voice slightly disapproving. But she recovered well. "How's that working out for you?" "Yes, fine, thank you. I really must be going. You know how it is." Mr. Das was one of Crank's many fishermen. Like so many others, he had chosen to name his son after the Jutta. The idea being that the Jutta would provide during their working days, and when they retired, the Jutta would continue to provide. Like the rest, he was opposed to the idea of the Floincy. As with everyone else, the reason was money, which in Crank's case was generally favours, threats, and the occasional intriguing piece of lint. The Floincy posed a risk to their income, as Crank had become increasingly reliant on the anglers for their food supply, and they were seeing a marked boom in profits. For those that knew what they were doing, fishing was now Crank's steadiest profession. Arion spotted the pair casting off amongst other fishermen, littering the coast, each jostling one another for the best spots. Both father and son had red hair, but where his father was short and stocky, Jutta was the sort of gangly boy who looked like he was almost solely made out of knees, elbows and thumbs. Arion approached. "Hello." Jutta turned. "Oh hey Arion, what brings you—" "Good gracious, don't ever come up at an angler from behind, lest you wish to have a hook in your eyebrow," said Jutta's dad without turning from his rod. He reeled in slowly to encourage the fish of an easy meal. Juta, by contrast, wheeled his in furiously, claiming that fish liked a challenge. The jury was out on that one, as were the fish. Sorry, Mr. Das. Yes, well, no harm done, I suppose, but it was bad practice. It won't happen again, sir. Good. Now let's hear no more of it. What can I do for you, young man? I'm here for Juta, sir. I was wondering if he would be able to assist me in the remake of the Foincy. Mr. Das pulled his hook out from the water and looked over at his son before turning to Arian. I don't know about that. Juta still has a lot to learn about angling. No, I don't think it would be appropriate. Oh, but Dad! No, this is a noble and competitive profession, and you will continue to learn until I have nothing more to teach you. Juta was silent. Do you know that Horden's boy caught more than most of the professionals last week? And you've got a year on him. Do you know why? It's because he has patience. I understand you have a fundamental objection to the Foincy, Mr. Das, but I really think if you gave it a bit of thought, you would see it differently. A frown formed. Are you calling me short-sighted, boy? Think carefully about what you want to say next. Arian opened his mouth, and Juta winced and pulled away from him like he might explode. All I'm trying to say is that the Foincy can be beneficial to fishermen such as yourself. The man returned his attention to the water and cast out again. Juta buckled in the silence. Good cast, Dad. Mr. Das didn't reply. Arian did. Why is it a good cast? Juta looked at him like he was crazy. Because it went out far. Oh, I see. So the further out into the water you cast, the gooder it is? Mr. Das was listening with an ear. Yes, of course, that's where the bigger fish are, said his son. Uh-huh. Well, with the Foincy, anglers will be able to go out farther than those stuck on land, and haul in bigger quarry. Arian rubbed his nails against his chest, and looked at them nonchalantly, with an unsubtle hint of showmanship. I will be in the position to ensure that certain citizens have better perks over the Foincy than others. Mr. Das started to reel in slightly quicker than he might have usually. What sort of perks? Arian smiled. Now you're talking. Look, we don't want to get bogged down with the details just yet. What's important is we have an understanding. Oh look, you've caught something. It was true. The man's line gave a jerk, then another. If that's not a good omen, I don't know what is. So, Juta and I will go work on the new Foincy, and you and your son can reap the benefits at a later date. Excellent. We'll be off. Thanks again, Mr. Das. Arian bustled Juta away from his father before either could add anything more to the conversation. The next day, Arian led the build, after a day of rigid planning the previous day. He and Juta quickly formed a good working rapport. They stopped for lunch after a lot of hard work, although to the curious bystander it did not appear as though much progress had been made. Juta and Arian had both been given lunches by their mothers, with wildly varying items. They agreed they should get outside, having been cooped up in the shack all morning, and headed for the sunrise point. There were a few fishermen still about, but most had gone for their lunch, so the duo had the pick of several good spots. They settled down and tucked in. Thanks for getting me out with that, said Juta, nodding towards the fishermen still around. All that not for you then? The baiting, the casting, the reeling? No, I'm not sure what is for me, but that isn't it. Maybe assisting you, when we get the Foincy finished. Out there collecting resources. Arian said nothing. That's assuming you need an assistant. Maybe it'll be a one-man job. Arian took a deep breath. Jew, listen, there's something I need to tell you. When we get this Foincy built, I need to leave. Juta stared blankly. I've been tasked with finding and returning the creators. My hope is that once we finish with this one, you will have learned the pitfalls and methods necessary to build one on your own. Arian smiled weakly. Then it will be you in charge of the expeditions to the banks of the river. Wow. And guppy impressions were all Juta could manage for a while. Will Codrich want me in charge? No idea. He isn't aware of this plan to build two. His only concern is the creators. But I made commitments to these people, and I'm determined to see them through. Or, at the very least, get someone else to do it. Exactly, said Arian, oblivious to any hint of belligerence. They finished lunch and got to their feet. Arian, who was used to maintaining some sense of trimness, brushed the sand from his clothes. Juta didn't bother. The afternoon's processes involved sawing, hammering and sanding, but most of their time still seemed to be spent measuring things. When it was time to slot a piece into position, the two would work the wood into the grooves they had etched into the grain. When they retired, they left behind the skeleton of the Foinzy naked on the floor. Definite progress was visible from just 2 days of working on the Foinzy with Juta, or rather 2 days not working with Godrich. When Arian stumbled into his home, he was ushered into a chair by his parents, and both figures focused on him. I spoke to Bruns today, his father began. He tells me you are building a Foinzy for the people, that it will be used for the aid of Crank. Now I don't mind you working for our noble king, but we did not raise you to be a liar. Tell your mother and I the truth of this. Arian looked between them, searching for some wiggle room. Their faces showed none. It seemed he was going to have to expose his scheme to a couple more people before the day was out. The truth is, my task and my duty remains to build a Foinzy that I will pilot and go in search for coal in Eden. However, as you say, I have promised many that their kind generosity will be rewarded with a Foinzy that will be used to gain food and resources that they need. I want to honour both these commitments. This morning I fired Godrich. He ignored the sharp inhale from his father, and replaced him with Juta, and his mother's tut. We will build a Foinzy that I will take in search of the creators. Juta will know how to build a second, which he will construct and lead the expeditions to the mainland, and to new fishing grounds. His parents exchanged a look. I don't think that's a good idea, said his father. You should finish what you told people you would do before you leave. I agree with your father. You shouldn't leave it to other people to carry out your word for you. In an ideal world, I wouldn't. But ultimately, I do not answer to the peoples of this island. I serve the king. He wishes me to leave in search of the creators as soon as possible, and that is what I will do. Mr. and Mrs. Kusith were taken aback. I'm sorry, but that's the way of the world. What do you know of the world? Questioned his mother. She raised a valid point, even if it was hypocritical. To date, the two worldliest Crankians were Eden and Cole, and they hadn't even seen a mythical creature yet. Being sheltered as he was, Arian wasn't too sure exactly what dangers the creators might be facing, or had faced, or come to a sticky end by. But he was sure there must be some form of peril out there. There was peril on the island, so it stood to reason that there would be perils in the rest of the world. Of course, not so long ago this sort of thinking would have been blasphemous. After the first settlers of Crank took it upon themselves to become grandparents, again, there will be no details into the events leading to this family dynamic. They decided it was time to tell their grandkids the story of how they came to Crank. Afterwards, the children became fearful of the land beyond. They would not sleep, fearful that someone would come for them in the night if they did. Their eldest grandchild, Eder, was, in every sense, a mummy's boy. So when his mother told him and his siblings that his grandparents had just made up the story, he took it without question. His mother went on to say that Granny and Grandpa had always lived on Crank, and when questioned about where they had come from by their daughters, she had been forced to think on her feet. She remembered a vague reference her mother had once made to some all-knowing being from above who judged their actions, for better or worse. She told what part she could remember. She had hoped that might be the end of it, but Eder asked more and more questions of her, curious of this Lord above. When she didn't have answers, he turned to his grandparents, who in turn received more glares and sealed their lips to the child, so Eder made up his own answers. It is not the easiest thing to become a preacher and develop an established flock in a place with only 7 residents, but that did not stop Eder trying. Every night at the dinner table he would rant and rave about various sins that they had all committed, and what they should be doing to repent. If there were any gods watching above, they were probably kicking themselves that they hadn't come up with such rigorous rules for their worshippers. One or two of them were probably considered taking Eder on for some clerical work. He was clearly a man of vision. Eder's efforts to convert his family were in vain, but he went on believing in the instructions to life he had created. In fact, he believed so strongly about them that there was a serious worry of the family line dying out, had his elder sister not. Well, it's not important what she did. The point is she changed his mind. Eder may have lost some of his faith, but the seed was born and future generations of Krankians took up where he left off. Over the course of a couple of centuries, a solid belief system was forged, with all the blanks filled in by inventive storylines, the most established of which was that Krank was the only thing that was real. The gods had stated Krank was theirs to enjoy, but not to be tempted by the fruits beyond its borders. The people of Krank should be proud of what they had, and all would be rich in the presence of their friends and families. Priests in Krank spent hours talking about it in various renditions, but whatever way they sliced it, it was always an elaborate, the grass is always greener type metaphor. And that was the line for a while, until the grass really was greener on the other side. Krank went through a deeply religious period. All its occupants took part in their daily prayers, and if there had been a book, they surely would have lived by it. As food and resources began to run short, people turned their blame to the gods, and the lazy ones, who found hating took up a lot of energy, stopped believing in them altogether. The rulers before Codrich and Arborella, the death penalty mad ones, put a stop to mass faith on Krank. Anyone caught preaching would quickly find themselves on the wrong side of life and death. Believers remained, but they quickly learned to keep their views behind closed doors. Many of these saw the Floincy as an abomination, and the fate of the creators a rightly dealt justice by the gods. King Duro and Queen Sira had realised early into their reign that they needed to get off the island to survive. All this gobbledygook, as they saw it, would put people off the idea. Through their sharp instruction, the first ideas to get off Krank were formed. Jutta emerged scoffing his breakfast, which resembled something along the lines of a bacon sandwich. Mouthfuls of greetings were met with polite acknowledgements from Ariam before the pair headed to the shack. It was a brisk morning, but the skies were clear and the air had a sizzle about it that suggested the day might turn out to be a good one. Krank was in full swing as they walked through its streets. Many of the stalls of Krank protruded out into the street under a gazebo-type structure, or were simply exposed by a collapsed wall of a house. In the kingdom, the idea of having an area for a market had not been considered. There was no quaint or charming bazaar where people could walk through a complex aroma of spices, scents, and blossoms, while marvelling at a range of decorations and fruits, or even pose for a caricature. Instead, various merchants were sprawled in a haphazard fashion throughout Krank, and due to limited items, each sold basically the same products as their competitors. Fruits, however, were at a premium, as were spices, pleasant scents, blossoms, decorations, and no one in Krank had the ability or saw the need to have a picture of themselves with grotesquely exaggerated features. In their place were heaps of meat and things to put meat in, on, or around. The good times were soon to end though. A few of the creators' inventions had made it to a commercial level, and at least one of their items could be found at most stalls amongst inventions which had been necessary for Krank's survival for as long as there had been people. Items such as a steam collector, the first prototype of which had been made very, very early on, as the water surrounding Krank varied from salty to brackish. In those early days they were made of wood. This process can take some time, and once Krank's population began to grow rapidly, it no longer made sense for everyone to do this individually, so among Krank's most respected traders were the water distillers. There were 3 rival competitors, each led by a single master brewer, with a fleet of assistants under him, all of which were usually promised the business, if and when the master brewer chose to retire. The assistants spent their days scuttling from the breweries to the banks to collect water in buckets. They carried it to the plant and loaded up the metal drums, while the master tended to the furnaces. Next to the royal abode was a tiny building, no bigger than a cupboard. The structure was guarded day and night by a small rotation of Crank's burliest and most illiterate figures. Inside, a hole had been dug. Initially the descent was just a sandy slope, but with depth the grains turned to coarse earth and then stone steps. The rock levelled and revealed a shiny wall made of iron. The various forgers of Crank would come before the king and queen and explain their need for a chunk of the wall and what it would mean for Crank. No one on Crank had any idea how the metal got there, or even how big it was, although the priests would probably have had some views on that. The factual version of the story, though, involved an especially plucky troll and an unfortunate group of dwarves. As everyone knows, dwarves have a fondness for metal. Yes, gold may be their favourite, but they have a special place in their hearts for the others too. Now, trolls have no great desire for metal in particular, but they do have an uncanny ability to want whatever other beings possess. These specific dwarves were not a great representation of the honour and loyalty that their race usually possess, and were indeed themselves thieves. In the process of absconding with a particularly large boulder of iron, down on their luck dwarves were a lot easier to come by back then, when the dwarf to gold ratio was less lucrative. The troll, whose name was Gumpert, lumbered after them, slowly gaining on the dwarves as they laboured with the iron. The rogues had broken through the mountain range by the time they spotted Gumpert. They attempted to redouble their effort, but it was little use. Trolls were renowned for their relentlessness. There were just over 30 dwarves, perhaps enough to overpower a single troll, but by this point, people of the world had learned that it was folderol to tangle with trolls, even if you could overpower it. The dwarves, breaking another proud characteristic of their people, scarpered, and Gumpert reached his quarry, somewhat disappointed at the lack of resistance. Still, he took up the reins the half-folk had been using, and started tugging. He wasn't entirely sure what he was going to do, or what he would do when he got there, but Gumpert was happy nonetheless. All this occurred back when dwarves still lived this side of the Great Water, back before the Jutta was more than a trickle. In the river's place was a barren ravine, and for reasons that are known only to Gumpert, if that, he stumbled into it, and the iron eagerly followed and landed squarely on top of him. For any other species in the world this would have proven fatal, but through a handy evolutionary loophole, trolls cannot die. Not really. Instead, they came up with a complicated and in many ways messier alternative. The Jutta slowly arrived and wore away the rocky ravine, and the stone built up around the iron, forming the bedrock of what would, one day, become Crank. With every chip taken away from the iron, Gumpert edges closer to release, and who knows, maybe one day he will walk again. Actually, let's not be coy about this. Gumpert is definitely coming back. Erin and Jutta wound their way through town and found themselves on the Sunrise Coast. The whole beach was bathed in sunshine, and they found themselves a space that was clear. Many of Crank's residents were making the most of the weather. The beach was littered with pink and blistering bodies, with the odd honey-brown physique here and there. One belonged to Lirna Hartleby. She had hair like golden waves. Her eyes were of a dazzling blue, above a cute curved button nose. Her mouth was small and often smiling. She had a delicate neck and slim shoulders. Her long legs were tipped with dainty feet. Inside her head she had a brain too. Like Arborella, she had a useful ability to rub off on people who might come in handy at a later date. Although still being young, she did less of the actual rubbing than Arborella, which of course meant the Queen was not a fan. The two Floyncy workers were beginning to feel the heat. Not far from them, one of the master brewer's minions stood next to a cask and was busy pouring for the growing crowd of customers. Erin and Jutta scraped together a miscellaneous collection from their pockets, which they felt would be sufficient for 2 cups, and Erin disappeared to fetch them. After a lot of queuing, with a little haggling, 2 noble traditions of Crank, Erin returned carrying a couple warm tankards of water. He gave one to Jutta, who drowned a quarter and found it suitably refreshing. The two sat peacefully, enjoying the sun. "Hello, boys," said a voice sweeter than sugar. Unfortunately, Jutta had his mouth full of sandwich at the time and choked, sending him into a coughing fit. Arian didn't fare much better. He had been about to take a drink, but missed his mouth and dribbled down his front. He frantically wiped himself down, while Lirna waited for them to recover as best they could. Once they had, they turned their heads to face her knees. As slowly as they dared, they shifted their gaze towards her deep blue eyes. "Hi, Lirna," said the bashful duet. "What are you two troublemakers up to?" she asked pleasantly. "Just enjoying the sun?" "Yes, Lirna. We're on our lunch break. What are you up to?" "Me? Oh, I've been here most of the morning. I'm still not happy with my tan, so just trying to get as much sun as I can." "I think your tan looks great." "Yes, really great. That's a great tan." "Oh, you guys are sweet." The boys stared. "So you said you're here on your lunch break, or something. What are you on a break from?" "We're working on the second fluency. I'm in charge of the build." Lirna nodded with some genuine interest. "Oh yes, fluency. I think I remember hearing something about that. Didn't Eden and Co already make one of those?" "Yes, they did. Well remembered. But their mission was not a total success, as you may know, and they have been temporarily lost. We have to build a new one so we can go abroad in search for food. It's going to be dangerous work, but I'm ready for it." "That's so interesting. Well, I've got to go just now. More sunbathing to do. I think I'll head to the sunset point." She leaned in to whisper to the two champions of charm, who were moments away from wetting themselves. "It's getting a bit crowded here, if you know what I mean." Erin and Jutta were quite sure that they didn't, but they nodded in agreement. Lirna stood back up. "Okay, I'll see you two adventurers later. I hope everything goes well with the fluency. Bye," she added pleasantly. Lirna turned to walk back to the beach, and the boys remained in quiet agreement that no one should talk through it. They watched her wave and smile her way up the slope until she was obscured by bodies. "Boy, I tell you," began Jutta, "she is really something." "Yeah, she's nice. I mean, if there was a way for me to just be with her all day, every day, that's all I'd want to do. Just imagine if that was possible. Wow," said Jutta, finishing the thought. Erin stared at him with a cocked eyebrow. "What will I have to do?" asked Lirna. Erin opened the creator's shack, presented an arm, and Lirna walked through. "You will be my assistant in the building of the new fluency. Of course, I'm happy to do all of the work. You would be here more as an advisor, and it's always nice to have someone to talk to." Lirna carried herself elegantly round the messy piles left by the creators, and stopped to stare at the semi-constructed fluency. "I thought Jutta was helping with it." Aaron put on his best lamented tone. Yes, he was. However, he has chosen to take sabbatical. A bit of a shame, really. We were starting to make really good progress. However, he said, perking up again, "I'm sure you will be more than adequate to fill the void. The job is yours if you want it." "It's a job? You mean I would get paid?" Aaron nodded. "Yes. Why? Who funds this?" "Codrich, the king. He says the fluency is a necessary innovation to sustain the people of Crank." "What do we get paid in?" "Oh, this and that. I assure you, it's not bad." "Okay, I'll take it." "Really?" said Aaron. "Yeah. My dad's been getting on at me lately." Aaron deflated slightly. "Besides, I'm sure it would be good fun to work with you. And Jutta, if he comes back." "Yes. I'm not sure about the likelihood of that one. I was being a bit diplomatic earlier. I actually had to fire him. He was stealing. Ghastly business," said Aaron. He clapped his hands together. "Now, let me show you where everything is."